Hello, and welcome to another episode of You Can Manage That, a podcast for first-time managers who want to level up their leadership skills. I'm your host, Chris Asper, and if you're a first-time manager who wants to help their people thrive, or what my guest calls bloom, both professionally and personally, then this episode is for you. I'm excited to speak with Dan Pontefract. Dan is a renowned leadership strategist, award-winning author, and a keynote speaker with over 2 decades of experience helping organizations and their leaders improve performance, productivity, and overall engagement. He has presented at 4 TED events and earned multiple industry awards, including Thinkers 50 Radar, HR Weekly's 100 Most Influential People in HR, People Hum's Top 200 Thought Leaders to Follow, and Inc. Magazine's Top 100 Leadership Speakers. Dan has written 5 best-selling books, and he also writes for Forbes and Harvard Business Review. And today, we are here to talk about his newest book that I think every leader needs to read, Work-Life Bloom. Dan, welcome to the show.
Hey, Chris, thanks so much for being here. Great intro. I need to sort of, I suppose, get you on the payroll because those are really kind words. And yeah, I would love everyone to read this book. Let's get into it.
Yeah, let's get into it. I mean, I've read many books, and I think this is an absolute game changer. In one of the chapters, you mentioned that one of the key purposes of this book is to help prepare leaders to lead more thoughtfully. What do you mean by that?
It sounds binary, doesn't it? As if like all leaders are unthoughtful, and that's not the point per se. But I suppose there's a couple things to unpack. One is quite obviously we were going into a pandemic being somewhat unthoughtful. I mean, the rising rates of burnout, stress, anxiety, anger, sadness. I mean, basically every Pixar character possible were on the rise. And then the pandemic hit, and we had this, honestly, Chris, this very thoughtful respite on behalf of leaders for about middle of March 2020 to roughly the end of the year-ish, I would say. And then we went back to old ways. It just sort of like slowly chipped away at what we were in, pre-COVID and 2018, 2019, and so on. So I started writing the book, in fact, in the summer of 2020, because I had finished my 4th book, and that was just about to come out in the fall. And I started noodling this idea. Well, yeah, what's thoughtful? What's unthoughtful? What are we doing? Because the book was called Lead, Care, Win, that 4th book. And I was like, well, those are leadership habits and behaviors of self. Like, how do we lead self? How do we lead others? So what more is there we can do to be thinking from an organizational perspective, how to be more thoughtful? And that's when I decided, I got some good advice to actually do some global primary research. I wanted to not wet finger the sky, so to say, and figure out, okay, what is it? Why aren't leaders unthoughtful or thoughtful? But what are the factors that make up people to be that genuinely thoughtful type of leader when it comes to its people and the people that they serve? So that's where it all germinated, to use another gardening metaphor, I suppose. It's just looking at a few terms that I thought weren't making a hell of a lot of sense and asking myself, well, what's going to make more sense for leaders to really be that more thoughtful of a leader?
You mentioned this survey that you did, and in the book, you labeled it the Global Work-Life Assessment Survey in 2022. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So, tell us more about the study.
A friend of mine who is an editor for Harvard University Press sort of gave me some very timely advice, and more or less she said, hey, your books are pretty good, Dan. Have you ever thought maybe of doing your own primary global research to back up your stories and your techniques? And what she was saying was that really good books ideally have 3 legs to a stool. They have the good stories, sort of other people's evidence and yours of what's going right and wrong. They have techniques, so practical suggestions on how to get better, whatever the book is about. But they also have primary data, evidence that you've gone out and said, hey, this is at least hopefully irrefutable to what it is that you're trying to purport in legs of the stool 1 and 2. So I did that. And I'd never done that before in the other 4 books. I had leaned on the evidence and research of others. I had my own stories, my own experience, my own one-on-one and focus group interviews and so forth. Like I'd always done that, but I hadn't gone out globally and asked, in this case, just under 10,000 people in 11 countries, what makes up someone to quote bloom and how's it going? And if those factors are correct, then, how's it going for you? And I learned a hell of a lot. Glad I did it. And a lot of that data, as you now know, Chris, is kind of tucked into the book itself.
And overall, without giving away too much of the study, because if you want to go get the study, you can take a look at it. What were some of the interesting high-level results from the study about people at work and people at life?
Such a wide range. A few like notable points that came up. If you kind of look at the sample size of, again, just under 10,000 people, I asked the question, do you feel like you're blooming in work and life combined? And that was pretty significant a question because I asked people just to self-assess like what they thought they might be. And when you do that sort of self-assessment, you just ask people, off the cuff, what is it like? There was a clear delineation between people who were leaders and people who were non-leaders. But then when I also put it through the logic that we built to actually come out with the output of what, a work-life bloom individual might be. So that's when the factors came into play. There was still a very large discrepancy between what a non-leader thought, those who don't lead a team, by the way, and those who were leaders. And the gap is like self-assessed, it's about a 15-point difference. And in the logic that we use for the work-life bloom model, there's like a 20-point gap. So I would say that one of the things that I've always thought was happening, which I didn't necessarily have evidence about, was what social scientists call fundamental attribution error. And that basically suggests that for a lot of the factors, including whether someone's blooming or not, Chris, leaders believe that they're doing a better job or feel that they're blooming higher than the team members in which they serve, yet they're kind of like, well, why aren't you blooming? Of course I am, so you should be too. And that was one of those recurring, repetitive stress syndromes that really irked me, but that I was able to prove, I suppose, in the assessment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've had that personal experience where leaders above me, they're like, yeah, things are going well. And I look at the people at my level, I'm like, things aren't really going well. Like, how come you can't see that? And I think your data shows that. It shows not only the difference between leaders and non-leaders, but also in gender too. You then came up with this beautiful framework about work-life bloom. And most people, they separate work from life, but you don't do that. So why don't you separate work from life?
Well, first of all, as you've alluded to, one of the myths I was trying to deconstruct, if not blow up, is work-life balance. And I'm guilty of it. Like, let's be clear, for new listeners or listeners who have no idea who I am. I mean, I spent 20 plus years in the corporate world as a leader and an executive, running culture change, running leadership development, running teams in sizes of 50 to 150. I spent a large portion of time in two blue chip companies called SAP and TELUS. So I've lived the life in the trenches experience of a lot of the nonsense that we were purporting and continue to purport. So work-life balance, I should say, is one of those. As you mentioned, bring your best self or most authentic whole self to work. Employee engagement, that itself is a crock of utter BS. Because what I learned, and what I suppose where wisdom comes from, is through age. Being 52 and looking back and doing the research, what I realized, Chris, was that when we talk work-life balance, first of all, that's a zero-sum game. And that's because you can't balance work and life. You have to look at them as both separate and integrated. So it's actually a little bit of both. And why I say that is that in the model itself, if you picture a 2x2 matrix, so work is on the y-axis and life is on the x-axis, work can be amazing or awful and anywhere in between. But life, that's you, the character of you, like self-worth, if you will, can be very clear or confusing. and somewhere maybe in between. And so, as I've said many times, I put this line in the book, our lives shape our work. Nevertheless, our work shapes us. You don't check your life at the work door and pretend that you don't have an ailing grandparent, or that someone's asking or thinking questions of your skin color, or why you're wearing a tattoo or a nose ring, or why you don't want to smoke, but that your smoke break now is just scrolling through TikTok because it's fun. It's an endorphin release. That's cool. But if you have a leader or a boss or an organization that's questioning your life or not even supporting some of the life factors, then it's really hard to be motivated to work. And then if there are incongruent work factors with you that feel like nails on a chalkboard, or you're eating a bag of nails and it doesn't taste well, of course, and there's all the blood that'll happen with the nails in your mouth, right? It's nonsense. Like, it's crazy. Like, it's so I'm belaboring your question, and I apologize, but if we can have a conversation, right, leader to team member, about what is it makes and shapes your work, and what is it makes and shapes your life, and that the two are more like two ropes that need to be knotted together as one, and looking at it and fulsomely and wholesomely, then we've got something to talk about as a leader.
And it's, I think also as well, not just that conversation, but the role of the leader to make sure that their direct reports or their team members, they're considering how to improve not only their work factors, but also their life factors as well, is one of the key takeaways I got from your book.
What I've never understood is why leaders believe that they and their team members need to be Teflon. Nothing sticks is the metaphor there, obviously. Where a leader is shy, if not averse, and will break out in a rash to be human from some of the things that are going on in their life and some of the life factors that might impact them at work. And then vice versa, not allowing the leader themselves and the chance to have those kind of life factor conversations with the team member. Now, to be clear, and I know you've read the book, so I appreciate that. As I've mentioned, this is not about helping a team member balance a checkbook or have a garage sale on Sunday and what to sell from their home. Like, that's not life. That's not what I'm talking about. The life factors I'm talking about are those character or self-development factors. When a leader pays attention to them and has conversations, if not development conversations, about them, the benefit is that that's being brought into the work. So to not talk about life in the way in which, like, well-being, let's say, is one of the life factors. Well, if you're not having a conversation about their emotional, social, physical, and even financial health, then why as a leader would you block yourself off from such a potentially awesome conversation about the humanity of that human being? And when you do, don't you feel as though that they're going to feel a higher degree of, if not self-worth, but self-actualization, which then thrills them, but also fuels them to do better at work? It's just sort of the no-brainer stuff to me why we aren't doing that enough.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that model, but one of the things I remember as a manager being told is like, oh, that's not professional. We don't want to talk to people because of like that, because this is a workplace. That's not professional. And you laughed at that. So obviously you have thoughts on that one.
It's just, I mean, if the definition of inanity was exactly that in the dictionary, then I would be a happy guy. Because that's exactly the point. Like, what is it that leaders think that they are not supposed to have wholesome, fulsome, real conversations about the things that are going on in the entirety of somebody's work and life? Like, why is it that there are leaders that refuse to memorize and know the names of their team members' kids? Why is it that they believe that when their team member comes in on a Monday or Wednesday and they've got a new outfit or a new hairstyle, maybe not mine, they say, hey, you look fantastic today? Why do they think that that is not going to help them? And that goes back to like sense of meaning or, well-being and so on. Like, it's just, that's the humane thing to do. And I don't want to get all generational on you, but I'm going to just for a second. I have a 20 and 18 and a 16-year-old. And my wife and I, Denise, my infinitely better half, have been observing a few things through them and their friends. And then when I set out and did some focus grouping with Gen Z and some, late stage millennials, I was like, they're yearning for a wholesome conversation. So news alert to any boomers and Xers and, older millennials that are in leadership roles. Like, you have got a tsunami of a cohort, a swarm, a hive of team members that are just begging for you to pay attention to their whole self.
And I think this is why I said this to you before the interview, that I think this is a game-changing model, just because I think that's where the leadership direction, well, the people are coming in and they need to be led in a different way. And I think your book does a fantastic job of being able to lead people who want to be led in that fashion. And so I want to give the listeners a taste of your model of talking about work-life bloom and the factors. So overall, can you describe to the listeners what the work-life bloom model is? And then we'll talk about the different factors.
So what I tried to do, Chris, was to simplify a model that people would resonate with, and it's very easy to depict and to understand, and then to sort of have a conversation with yourself, but also team member to team member or leader to team. And so very simple, 2x2 matrix. On the y-axis, which is the left, that's work. And on the x-axis, that's the one at the bottom, that's life. And if we don't believe in work-life balance, what we believe in work-life bloom, to use the gardening metaphor, if blooming is in the top right quadrant of these 4 quadrants, that basically means that there are certain work factors and certain life factors, that are amazing in the work side and clear on the life side. And that's what we should be aiming for. So to bloom is to have both of the work and the life factors, the predominant portion of them, in a positive state. That's blooming. But we need to be also real. And that's kind of where I'm suggesting that things like employee engagement scoring and net promoter scoring and all these other ones, like, they've just got it wrong. They're all looking at it from a percentage basis. Like, we need to get more people engaged. Well, actually, what I'm suggesting is that we have, just like the seasons and just like there are storms and just like there is sun, we're going to be in different personas, the other 3 in the 4 quadrants, dependent upon what's happening in our work and or our life. So on the bottom right quadrant, so that's when work basically sucks and your life factors are going pretty well. They're clear. So I call that stunted, to further the gardening metaphor. So when a plant is stunted, they're wilting, but they're not dead. What they have is good stock, so to say. There's good nutrients, there's good soil, but they need some assistance to help them get back up to blooming. And that's where the leader needs to come in, because there are work factors getting in the way of blooming, but the life factors are actually going okay. So that's stunted. On the top left quadrant, what you see there is work is going amazing. So the work factors are going well, but I'm questioning some or a majority of my life factors. And if that's the case, what I call that is budding. So when a plant is budding, they are peeking through the soil, Chris, and they're sort of saying, hey, I just need a little more sun, a little more water, maybe some chlorophyll is gonna help me out here. Maybe there's some good nutrients that I need. And that's where a leader can really knock it out of the garden park, so to say, by having those conversations on the life side, the life factor side, and not forgetting that we still have to continue to work on the work factors. And then the last one, the bottom left, this isn't hopeless. This is, I call, renewal. And the reason it's called renewal is that we're not dead. What we are is just trying to look at things in a slightly different way, and we need some help. And now we got some work to do individually. We're in renewal. So that, again, means work and life are both, awful and slightly unclear. The boss, the leader, other leaders potentially can have these conversations with the team members. So the idea is to bloom. The reality is that we can't bloom all the time because work and life factors get in the way. We might be stunted. We might be budding. We might be in renewal, And those are the factors of work and life actually create these personas. So it's not about engagement, it's not about work life balance, it's not about your most authentic self. It's how do you be your best? And if your best is budding and stunted and renewal, that's okay for the time being, so long as you recognize it. And hopefully your leader has something to do with you to help you get back to blooming one day.
Thank you very much for depicting that model and telling us the different areas. So there was blooming, stunted, budding, and renewal. And you mentioned that there were different work factors and different life factors, and that you don't need to have all of them be amazing, but the majority of them to be pretty good when it comes to blooming. I want to talk specifically about the work factors. And so through your research, what did you find to be the 6 work factors that really mattered when it came to blooming in work?
Basically, it comes down to 6, and those 6 are they're broken down into 2 sections, 3 and 3. And the first 3 are how you feel effectively as an individual at work, with your boss, at the organization, on the team. And the other 3 are about how you view the team and or the organization in certain methodologies. So let me explain these. So the first 3 are what I call trust, belonging, and valued. Trust is about sort of that authentic kind of inconsistent behavior where you feel as though that your team and your boss are advocating for you when you're in the room and when you're not in the room. So you've got advocacy. And that's what really trust is all about. So when you feel as though that you can have advocacy, people are authentic and they're true, and you feel like you're part of something. So trust is key. Belonging is when each of your experiences, the accumulation of them, feel that it's more net positive than net negative. And that there's 3 key things going on, Chris, that you need to feel to be belonging. You need to feel safe, you need to feel represented, and you need to feel as though that you're understood. So if you get those 3 and you start thinking about, things like your identity, where you've come from, what you look like, if you feel understood, represented, and safe, gosh, that goes a long way for you saying, oh, I like it here. I like my team. I like my boss. I like my boss's boss. This is pretty cool. And the third of the 3 kind of individual ones is valued. So that's about, are you feeling valued for your contributions? And the value comes in the form of recognition and appreciation. Recognition it could be money-based, it could be non-money-based. It's just being publicly or not publicly recognized. But appreciated is a little bit different, because appreciated is the behavior of acknowledging people for their efforts, not recognizing it. So acknowledgement and recognition are different, or appreciation is. And then the other 3, the organizational ones, purpose, strategy, and norms. So what's purpose? Purpose is, do I believe my organization has an intention and I guess a belief, and will it carry through on that intention and belief of what we stand for in the community? Serving all stakeholders, not just shareholders or profit seekers. So what I found is that team members are wanting to work for organizations that are not just in it for the sake of money and revenue and profitability, although important, but that they are in for the greater good, I'll call it. Number 5, strategy. So that's about direction and goals and responsibility and priorities and feeling connected to it. So imagine, Chris, and I've seen this all too often, as you might have as well, it's January 5th, the new year's kicked off, it's the new fiscal as well. Executives talk about the strategy for the year, how it connects to the next 3 years, and then crickets for the next 12 months, right? And so if you're on the team and you're like, wait a second, like, how's this all, like, what happened to the strategy? Or how do my objectives, what I'm doing, connect to the strategy? If your leader and leaders aren't making that connection for strategy to you, you get lost. You're just like, whatever, I don't know, I guess, and you become ambivalent. And then the 6 of the 6 is norms. So norms are, just think of them as like guidelines or operating processes or principles, I suppose, about culture. So how do we communicate? How do we collaborate? How do we get stuff done? What's getting in the way? Is there red tape? Is there bureaucracy? Is there friction? And how does it become seamless so that I'm not frustrated by every little thing that is going on here from a culture perspective?
And this is what I love about your model is 6 things. So you're not giving like 12, 15 things. You're giving like the 6 top things, which I think is doable. And the way that you separate them is fantastic as well. But in the book, you even say, okay, well, in order for me to improve something like trust, this is exactly what you need to look at. If I want to look at norms, this is exactly what you look at. Value, this is exactly what to look at. And so if you're going to read, whoever's listening to this, go get the book. Go to those chapters. You'll see the study. You'll see the different things that you could do, and they're practical. And Dan just gave you a little taste of in terms of what those things to look for. Again, which I think is fantastic. So you talked about the work factors, the life factors. What are the 6 life factors that are important? Can you, if you could mind explaining what the 6 life factors are?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks. So again, we're on the x-axis. So you've got work, you got life. Life's down there at the bottom. And from a life factor perspective, there's another 6, another batch of 6. And thank you for that comment, by the way. I do appreciate that. So the first is relationships. And this has to do with what really is your network. Whether they're strong ties or weak ties, we're often fueled, I believe, we're fueled by a line that I love, which is my network is my net worth. And so what's that network? Not just size, but quality. And when you bring it back to the boss, how is the boss having a conversation about networks and thus relationships? Because when we're lonely, and sidebar, Chris, Dr. Vivek Murthy is the Surgeon General of the US, and in end of May 2023 issued an 88-page doctrine that suggested loneliness is the new epidemic in our organization, something we need to curb because it's creating anxiety, stress, and aiding to burnout. So if relationships are key, then I think that can help combat some of the issues with loneliness, and it's a pervasive global issue, not just an American one. Certainly it's in Canada as well. Number 2 is skills. Skills are the attributes effectively that you're developing and kind of those aptitudes. So if a leader's not paying attention to the life factor skill and the individual's not paying attention to their own life factor called skills, there's a kind of a status quo mentality that envelopes. And if you're in status quo territory and not either personally pushing yourself to develop extra skills, whatever they may be, or the leader's not having a conversation with you, how is the life growth going to happen, let alone the work growth, which is why I believe it's a life factor. Because when bosses and teams and individuals pay attention to the development of self, gosh, it opens up all kinds of other opportunities and avenues. Number 3 is well-being. We sort of touched on this. So that's, your psychological, your physical, your financial, your emotional, your social well-being, your wellness. And when you're unwell, so to say, and you bring that into work, does all of a sudden you become well because, you're just getting a paycheck and maybe hanging out on a Zoom or Teams call 3 times a week with others? Like, no. So again, having good conversations and figuring out ways in which to help people with wellness and well-being thus is key. And then the last 3, meaning, agency, and respect. So from a meaning perspective, different than purpose is about the organization. Meaning is effectively like you have this daily basis need to feel worth, like self-worth. And so if you don't feel worth and you come to work, gosh, that's going to stink, isn't it? So again, what is it that we can do to help people feel and exhibit worth in some of the ways in which they interact with one another, the ways in which that they conduct themselves, and so on? Agency is about self-determination related to decisions. So do I feel empowered so that I'm allowed to self-determine and make decisions? And can I bring that mindset into the job, into the workplace? I hope so. And respect is about dignity and feeling kind of admired for who you are as a human being. And when we have respect in our lives, we hopefully bring that back into our works, and vice versa, the other way around.
And with each of those points, and again, I don't want to give too much away of the book, there's practical advice in terms of what a leader can do when it comes to improving any of those factors. I do want to talk about one, because you mentioned that we are in a lonely epidemic. In the study that you just referenced, the 88-page study that was released in May, because you said relationships are important, and you talked about why, but what can a leader or manager do to help their team members develop those relationships?
I believe I've distilled 3 kind of takeaways or 3 Yeah, leadership actions to take in each of the 6 work and the life factors. So when we talk about relationships, I narrowed it down to what I basically called inside, outside, online. And so inside relationship network building is what the leader can do to make connections inside the organization, if not, on the development, right, of those connections and people within the team itself. You're like, Dan, this is a life factor. What's it got to do with anything? What do you mean? Well, you're teaching them the skills, right, of how to do certain things. The leader is having like skip level meetings or skip level discussions. They're encouraging people to be part of team member resource groups, learning groups, book clubs, whatever, and so on. The outside piece, so we've done inside. The outside now is a life factor of saying, well, what can you do to help that individual connect to other people outside of work? And how can you make some of those introductions possible? How can you encourage people to attend like volunteer events, like in the community, or encourage them to be part of SIGs or special interest groups, or, having the ability to say, hey, there's a couple of events here coming up on the calendar. I think you should go think about this, like go take on these events, whatever they may be. So that's pushing someone to be thinking, oh, this networking piece, this relationship piece is so important. My boss is actually helping me see this from the perspective of outside the organization. That's pretty cool. Both of those, inside and outside, by the way, are physical face-to-face encounters. And so the third one, online, is recognizing that, there's a lot going on online. So now I've sort of demarcated the inside the organization physical face-to-face with outside the organization physical face-to-face with internet or online based avenues. And so what can the leader do to help with some of the external, internal channels, I call them, events that are online that allow people, again, to see that it's not just about physical face-to-face, that there's opportunities to connect people on LinkedIn, right? On Slack, on community groups in the community, whatever that may be. External events that are online, like webinars or free LinkedIn Live or whatever the case may be. If a leader's having conversations about these as well, Chris, then gosh, again, whether it's inside, outside, or online, you've got a trifecta now of doing something about the relationships life factor.
Mm-hmm. And what you're really doing, and you allude this to in the book, is that the leader is creating conditions for relationships and networks to form. You're not saying, you're not forcing them, you're creating the condition, right?
This is exactly it. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't have said it better. Well, I guess I did say it, so I guess I did say it better.
Those are your words, Dan, in the book. I can't reference the page, but
wait a second, man. You wrote that. So.
Yeah, you're writing the conditions, and we'll talk about soil and water and the soil and water test afterwards, but you are creating the conditions for these factors to bloom within your people. And also as well, you saying, leaders bearing partial responsibility for nurturing relationships, and you wrote this, you said, if you believe business is built on relationships, make building them your business.
It's a great Scott Stratton line. So a friend of mine, and when he said that to me, I was like, okay, that's going in the book because it's just fantastic. And it's so true though, right? I mean, if your business is people in essence, and we should be all in the people business, well, make your business being about people. And that's what if there's an overarching point to the book, it's that work-life bloom is you as a leader having these important conversations about the conditions, right, that allow people to bloom. And that being said, you've nailed it, Chris. It's not about forcing people to fish, as the old adage goes, right? It's teaching them to use the rod and to fish on their own. And that's what, at the end of the day, that's what leadership is all about.
Mm-hmm. A leader's job is really tough, and you always want to figure out about, am I doing enough? Where are people at? And for that reason, you left them with 2 assessments or 2 tests, one called the soil test and one called the water test. And you have this in your book in terms of an assessment. So when you read the book, you'll learn the factors, then you'll learn about the test. Can you briefly explain what the purpose or benefit is of the soil and the water test?
Yeah, I guess I needed to continue with the metaphor to the point where people now, at the end of the book are like, okay, how many more things can he tie into sort of the whole garden metaphor here? So a soil test and a water test. These are both leader tests. So this is for the leader to conduct, so to say, right, with themselves and their team. So the soil test is, what are you doing as a leader to effectively have these continuous conversations, these scans, I call them, of your team members' work-life factors? Because, as I make a point out in the book, but also it's pretty self-explanatory, we all go through seasons and cycles and weather events. So whether it's work or life, maybe an acquisition happened, and you all of a sudden have like 6 new team members on your team. You're like, whoa, what's going on here at work? Or you've moved cities or moved house or whatever. And some things that are happening from your well-being, your relationships, maybe, your sense of meaning on the life side. So these things are happening no matter what. So what are you doing as a leader to conduct the so-called soil test? That is having these scans and asking the team members, well, how's it going? Not just perfunctory, how's it going, but actual conversations about, the 6 work and the 6 life factors. But the water test, that's a little bit different, because a water test is actually you having almost like a self-reflection test to see if you're able to actually apply the work-life factors. So are you doing it? If you're going through each of the 6 work and life factors and having questions with the team member, i.e. the soil test, that's good. Like, again, you should be doing that. And then also asking like their persona, like, where are you? Are you renewal and why, et cetera, right? But when you're conducting a water test, what you're basically saying is you're asking yourself, all right, do I know who's blooming or not? Am I doing everything possible to enact these 6 work or 6 life factors? What like, you're being critical on yourself. Otherwise, who else is going to be? Unless you and your boss were having a conversation as leaders, hey, let's keep each other truthful about how we're conducting ourselves. But it's really a self-reflected self-assessment. What am I doing to make sure that I know that I'm doing all that I can to develop my people with this work-life model?
And again, why I love it is the book, it's practical, right? You're doing a good job of explaining your research, explaining the factors, what they can do. And, at the end, it's like, all right, so you want to apply this. Okay, great. These are the soil tests. You got to continuously scan. And like you said, there are other factors that today someone might be blooming, tomorrow they might be budding, and you'll have to continuously scan that. And also for the leader themselves to do that self-reflection of, okay, this is what I got to stay on top of. Am I even applying the factors to myself?
Mm-hmm. And I mean, it sounds vainglorious perhaps, but the very similar assessment we did to sort of gather the data and to see how many people were blooming or not and so forth, and what each of the factors meant to some of the people around the world, I took a pretty close version of that assessment and made it available for free. So people can go and do it now if they wanted to. And I urge people to, and I urge them just to even, you don't have to buy the book, just have a conversation about their persona. Why, Chris? Because leaders are urged to by me, team members deserve those types of work-life human conversations. But the thing I realized, again, having turned 52, is that, I've been all for multiple times. I've worked on my own now as a company of one for the last 5 years, but prior to that was, 22 years working in basically 4 different companies. And in those companies, when my roles change of my own doing, I saw myself in various stages, or personas, I should say, based on the work-life model. And I didn't even know it until I put myself through the model after I came up with the model. So there's tons of people out there that don't know why they're feeling why they feel, and they think that they should be engaged because that's what we're telling them they should be. They think they should be balanced because that's what we've been telling them that they should be. And in fact, it's okay to not be balanced, to not be engaged, but we need to do a better job of having a conversation about why, and maybe personas are a better way to have that conversation.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. And there's a reason why you write books, and the reason why you want people to read it. What you just talked about, is that the change that you're hoping to create by producing this book?
I've lived by a declaration of purpose for years now. And I came up with this I must have been 2000, 2001. So that's over 20 years. And that declaration of purpose is just a very simple line. We're not here to see through each other. We're here to see each other through. And why I bring that up is because I believe I've been put on this earth to help others. And I really struggle when I'm in doing keynotes and workshops and I get DMs or whatever, emails from people, and they come up to me and they say, well, first of all, they might say thank you, but then they'll break down in tears or they're lamenting about something in a DM or email about their situation. And I struggle with that, I guess, Chris, to be slightly more open kimono than you expected, because I kind of hope and wish that leaders understood the impact they can have on a person's life, and that it's not just a financial transaction for a paycheck, although important. There's just way more to it. And so to answer your question, I suppose, yeah, I'd like the dialogue to change so that the relationship of work and life can change for as many people as possible.
Mm-hmm. I think this is a nice way to wrap up, because I think the first question I asked you was, you're preparing leaders to lead more thoughtfully, and you just answered that right there of your reason why. Dan, thank you so much for the chat today. If you had one takeaway for someone to remember from our conversation today, what would you say that takeaway is?
Well, the book is not called Work-Life Doom. Let's make sure we get it right.
Work-Life Bloom. Yes. Yeah.
That there's hope, meaning it's okay to be in renewal or stunted or budding. You don't have to be fully engaged, thus blooming all the time. It's okay. But it feels better to be in blooming, for sure. So if you can, and you're a leader, try to self-reflect and see and ask yourself if you're having those conversations about the factors with your team member. And if you're a team member, it's totally okay to be openly asking yourself, well, how do I feel between these work and life factors? And to do some adjustments and justifying where you're at in your working life and what you might want to delve into to improve and to maybe reach that bloom phase.
And if my listeners want to learn more about you, the book or the Global Work-Life Assessment Survey, where can they go to next? Website, social media, LinkedIn, all of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy. Worklifebloom.com gets you essentially to the landing page of the book. All my stuff is there. The free assessments there, all kinds of other free goodies, actually. So, worklifebloom.com is probably the easiest.
Awesome. And if you're an HR person looking for a trainer or a speaker, Dan does speaking as well. And the book comes out when?
Globally, November the 7th. But as always, I like to give my Canadian brethren and colleagues an advanced start. So October 24th in Canada.
Amazing. Pre-order is available now. Highly recommend. This book is a game changer, and feel blessed to be able to have read a preview copy of the book before it gets released. And so, Dan, I enjoyed this conversation, and I want to wish you the best. Hope this book goes on to the bestseller, because it belongs there. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise with my audience today.
Chris, keep being you. You are well prepared, well versed. Your accolades are accepted and acknowledged, and I thank you greatly. This was a wonderful conversation. You're a great conversationist, and keep doing what you're doing. We need more Chris's, obviously, in this world.
Awesome. Thanks for listening to another episode of You Can Manage That. For more information about Dan, check out worklifebloom.com. The link to that is going to be in the show notes. I'm Chris Asper. For more information about me, you can go to my website, chrisasper.com. And if you like what you heard, or if you're watching this on YouTube, obviously like what you saw, be sure to subscribe to the show. Join us again next time when we talk with other leaders and experts so you can manage that. Bye for now.